Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Missouri Botanical Garden. I'm Neshka Pfeiffer, Sachs Museum Curator and your host and moderator for the 10-part series, Bioculture, Plants and People Interacting, organized by the William L. Brown Center and made possible by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Each of the 10 talks in this series explores the ways that plants and people interact through the lens of the Missouri Botanical Garden's Biocultural collection. The objects in this collection, which range from simple carved wooden spoons to complex herbal compounds, are tangible evidence of the ways that plants and people interact. They are a valuable resource for understanding humanity's biocultural heritage and for the conservation of nature itself. They're also a means of preserving traditional knowledge, documenting livelihoods, and showing the lasting influence of ethnobotany on the diversity of human cultures. The talk today will last approximately 30 minutes with a 20-minute presentation and time at the end for Q&A. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to use the Q&A function in the box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll sort through your questions and get to as many of them as possible at the end of the presentation. Today's program will be recorded and posted on the Missouri Botanical Garden's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. We are able to offer accessibility features, including ASL interpretation for the deaf and hard of hearing, and live captioning, which you can access via the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. To turn that off or for more options, just click on that closed caption feature. We respectfully acknowledge that we host this event from the traditional ancestral lands of the Osage Nation, which was historically home to many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. Particularly when speaking about the interactions of plants and people, we want to honor and express gratitude to the indigenous and local people whose wisdom and innovations have shaped and continue to shape the ways in which we engage with the natural world. I'm going to ask Dr. Robbie Hart, Director of the William L. Brown Center at the Missouri Botanical Garden, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Neshka. The William L. Brown Center at the Missouri Botanical Garden is dedicated to the study of useful plants, understanding the relationships between humans, plants, and their environment, the conservation of plant species, and the preservation of traditional knowledge for the benefit of future generations. Today's speaker centers her work on that human-plant-environment relationship. Kate Farley is a doctoral candidate in sociocultural anthropology at Washington University in St. Louis. Her work focuses on the culture of harvesting American ginseng and other valuable medicinal herbs in central and southern Appalachia. She has also pursued training in herbal medicine and maintains an interest in Appalachian folk remedies. She'll introduce us to a set of plants that have a long history of use and remain a vital component of people's livelihoods today. Many of these plants have global economic significance, but can also be found in the forests around us here in Missouri. Kate, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Robbie. And hello, everyone. It is great to be here. And thank you to also the Missouri Botanical Garden for hosting this talk series. So as Robbie said, my name is Kate Farley, and I am a doctoral candidate in cultural anthropology at Washington University in St. Louis. And so as a cultural anthropologist, I focus on the stories that people tell about plants and the ways that plants are locally understood to be socially and economically and symbolically important in different cultures and societies in different places around the world. And so today, I'm going to share with you a bit about some of the folk medicine traditions in Appalachia that take advantage of the incredible herbal biodiversity of the region. And then I'm going to talk a bit about some of the harvesting practices and conservation challenges today. So without further ado, let's get started. And so first off, I would like to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say Appalachia. So geographically, the Appalachian Mountains range from the hills of northern Alabama all the way up through New England up to Canada, as far north as Newfoundland. So legally, the United States recognizes 400 something counties as belonging to Appalachia. And that extends from Mississippi all the way up to the southern tier of New York. But when people talk about Appalachia, they tend to be talking about a much more limited region that corresponds roughly to the area that is highlighted in red on the map on this slide right here. Though there are regional differences within this region that we call Appalachia, it's linked by similar rugged mountain terrain, mixed mesophytic forest. So it's a mountainous woodland environment, by a history of indigenous removal and subsequent settlement by homesteaders and frontiers people, and by disproportionately high rates of poverty despite a wealth in natural resources. When most people who haven't spent a whole lot of time in Appalachia think about the region, a few things come to mind. One of those things might be coal mining and the coal industry, maybe the destructive effects of mining techniques like mountaintop removal mining. Another thing might be the opioid crisis, which you hear about a lot in the news, or the archetypal figure of the hillbilly, who is still the butt of some jokes in popular culture. And I want to push back on some of these stereotypes about Appalachia by highlighting the natural beauty of the landscape. So it's full of these rolling hills and deep, narrow valleys and gorges. Rain is plentiful. Parts of southern Appalachia actually are a temperate rainforest. And there is an amazing amount of botanical biodiversity, which I illustrate with some of the photos on the slide. So there's the flame azalea and the trillium and the trout lily, as well as a photo of the New River Gorge in West Virginia, and just an illustration of what a typical woodland scene might look like. And so not only is this region home to an abundance of beautiful wildflowers, there are also many medicinal plants that are native to the region. And so this abundance of medicinal herbs gave rise to a robust wild herb collecting industry in the region, which actually goes back centuries. Some herbs, like American ginseng, have historically been mainly exported, but other herbs were also used domestically as the raw materials for medicines. So remember, modern pharmaceutical chemistry has not been around for that long in the grand scheme of things. Doctors relied on herbal medicine even into the 20th century. And today, many drugs are still derived from natural sources. So this photo is a historical plaque taken in downtown Boone, North Carolina, near Appalachian State University. And it's talking a little bit about Wilcox Herbs, which is one of the big root and herb dealers that was in the region. And historically, gathering wild plants played a very important role in the lives of many rural Appalachians. Imagine you're a homesteader. You live in a log cabin that your family built themselves, maybe in the Smoky Mountains near the North Carolina-Tennessee border. For the most part, you're pretty self-sufficient. You're subsistence farmers. You raise crops and livestock to feed yourselves, and you can make, forage, grow, hunt, pretty much everything that you need to get by, with a few exceptions. You might need to go to town to buy firearms and ammunition for hunting, or things like sewing needles or salt or sugar or coffee. So how do you get this stuff? Well, one way to do that is you can collect herbs like ginseng or bloodroot or black cohosh or lady slipper and sell them to a local herb buyer for cash. And then as Appalachia industrialized, wild plants and herbs also helped supplement low incomes. So historically, mining companies would waive trespassing laws and allow residents of coal mining communities to access undeveloped land owned by the company to hunt and gather. This is something that is, people will still go onto coal company owned land to hunt and gather, even though there's much greater enforcement of trespassing laws these days. But historically, coal companies used to provide mining families with garden space. The idea being that companies could get away with paying lower wages if families were also growing their own food. I haven't found concrete evidence yet that there was this specific logic behind allowing access to mine-owned lands, but it's plausible. And trading in herbs definitely occurred in company stores and such. And so not all of the herbs that rural Appalachians collected in the woods were destined for commerce. Appalachia developed its own folk medicine traditions that were highly reliant on woodland medicinal herbs. And there's, of course, many regional variations. But in general, Appalachian folk medicine is combining European traditions with Native American and African traditions. And it incorporates folk magic, often using like specific psalms or Bible verses in sort of magical incantations to achieve specific results, like removing warts or breaking fevers, things like that. Many of these remedies rely on local plants. And so the quotation on this slide is from one of my interlocutors from the Blue Ridge Mountains, relaying something that her grandmother used to tell her. The leaves are medicine, the roots are money. And so here she's specifically talking about ginseng. They would dig up these plants, sell the roots for cash, but then keep the leaves of the plant and any broken or damaged roots to use for medicine themselves. And so in Appalachian folk medicine, herbs are usually consumed as either a tea or a decoction, so basically infused in water, or sometimes as sort of a tincture made with whiskey or moonshine. And some forms of Appalachian folk medicine would be practiced at home by just anybody. So family might make a batch of spring tonic with some of the highly nutritious herbs of early spring to, quote, purify the blood after a long winter of deprivation where you're eating, dried and preserved, things all winter. But there were also experts in some Appalachian communities. So experts in folk medicine and the uses of medicinal plants. And depending on where you are, they might be called, midwives, root doctors, grannies, other forms of folk healers. And so here we have an example of a remedy from an Appalachian folk doctor. And this is from the Missouri Botanical Gardens Biocultural collection. And it's this unassuming little bag of what kind of looks like wood chips, but it's actually mostly dried plants, roots and leaves. And it was created by a man named Catfish Gray, who was an herbalist and folk doctor who lived and worked in West Virginia, beginning his practice in the 1950s, and he died in 2002. And in the 1970s, Apple Shop, which is a film workshop based in Kentucky that makes very cool documentaries about life in Appalachia, made a documentary about a day in the life of Catfish Gray titled Man of the Woods. So this got him quite a bit of, attention and notoriety sort of beyond the immediate confines of his community. And so the black and white photo on this slide is a still from the film of Catfish Gray. It's a little hard to see, but what he's holding up there is a freshly dug ginseng plant. And Catfish created herbal remedies made from wild plants that he harvested from the West Virginia woods. And he would also give out diet and lifestyle tips that seem to have combined his own observations about what healthy animals in the wild eat with food prohibitions taken from the Old Testament of the Bible. So for instance, he thought that pork was unhealthy, echoing the prohibitions from Leviticus. And he also advised against eating instant or processed food, but also promoted a few more unusual beliefs, like the idea that tomatoes are unhealthy and cause cancer. And so this is the list of plants that are included in Catfish Gray's herbal blend, which I'm not sure I articulated this before, but the herbal blend in the previous slide was specifically noted to help treat cancer. And so this is the list of plants that were included. And this is quite the hodgepodge. He put in seemingly everything but the kitchen sink in here, including some things that I personally would not advise taking internally, like bloodroot and comfrey. But this also illustrates the incredible diversity of medicinal plants that grow in Appalachia. So all of these plants that I've highlighted here in orange are native to Eastern North America. Some debate with some of these about whether they're native or introduced. I think oxalis is one of those that people will argue about. But the plants that are faded to gray, they are native to Europe and Asia and have been naturalized here in the wild in North America. So you can find all of these in the woods. And you can still buy a very similar blend of these herbs today, either in loose tea form or in capsules. It's sold by a company called the Penn Herb Company as Catfish Bitters. Note that we no longer get this for cancer designation. The blend is marketed as just an overall health tonic. And the advertising copy reads, Catfish Bitters is the legendary tonic from Catfish Gray, man of the woods, a 5th generation folk healer from the mountains of West Virginia. The legendary combination of herbs and roots detoxifies and reinvigorates the entire body. And herbalists and herbal products manufacturers today, they kind of have to walk a fine line between providing accurate information about products, but also not claiming to diagnose or treat illnesses. So you wouldn't be allowed to market something like this as for cancer under the current, legal regulatory system. Many of these herbs that are used in Appalachian folk medicine are also important in commerce today, and many are still harvested from the wild. So according to one estimate, something like 60 to 90% of medicinal and aromatic plants in trade are wild harvested. And on this slide, I have photos of some of the plants that people I worked with in Appalachia would most frequently harvest for sale. So on the far left is a bag of ginseng roots that had been just sold to a dealer when I took this picture. In the middle is a freshly harvested bloodroot cut open so that you can see how it gets its name. And on the right is a man holding a bundle of goldenseal that he just harvested. Locally, this plant is also sometimes known as yellow root or Hydrastis. And if you walk into your local health food store, or even the herbs and supplements aisle at Whole Foods, you'd see products that contain these plants. And some of the folks who dig these wild plants in Appalachia will do it recreationally. Basically, it's an excuse to spend time out in the woods doing something fun. If you find something valuable, great. But if not, oh well. But for a lot of people, harvesting wild roots and herbs is an important source of supplemental income in a region where living wage jobs are scarce. And the problem with harvesting many of these herbs from the wild is the potential for over-harvesting. Plants like goldenseal, black cohosh, false unicorn, especially American ginseng, are slow-growing, long-lived perennials that can take years to reach reproductive maturity. And there are many parts of Appalachia where people say goldenseal, for instance, was once abundant, but now there's none left, at least not in the wild. And annual ginseng harvests have been declining for decades. It's worth noting, though, individual harvesters probably should not get all of the blame for overharvesting. Habitat loss, climate change, even an abundance of white-tailed deer are all significant factors that contribute to the decline of some of these understory forest herb populations. It's possible to cultivate many of these plants, taking some of the pressure off of harvests from the wild. But a lot of the time, the economics of it just still favor wild harvesting. If you want to cultivate, say, black cohosh, you need to own or lease land, purchase seeds, do all the planting and maintenance, and then wait several years before your crop is ready to harvest. That's a lot of upfront capital and risk. especially if your alternative is just to walk into the woods and harvest what's already growing there. However, there is an increased interest in cultivating some of these plants. There's quite a long history of people in Appalachia cultivating American ginseng in semi-wild settings. This practice now is often known as wild simulated or forest farmed ginseng. The photo on this slide is of some wild simulated ginseng plants that are being moved to a new location on a farm I was at in North Carolina. And there's also increasing interest in encouraging forest farmed herbs like goldenseal and black cohosh as consumers become increasingly aware of and concerned about the environmental impacts of the products they buy. And with that, I will turn it over to everybody for questions. And thank you so much for listening.
Kate, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I've got a few questions myself, actually. But before we start the Q&A, which please do drop your questions in the Q&A box for us, I would like to encourage everyone to please take a moment to fill out our survey and also join us for our next talk, which is on April 27th by Brown Center staff member Carolina Romero, who will be presenting in Spanish, but we'll have live English translation available on deconstructing a traditional Amazonian ceremonial costume and unveiling the role of plants for its elaboration and cultural significance. I did not say that in Spanish because I could not pronounce it. So thank you for your patience on that. Also, this talk, along with 2 future Spanish language presentations on May 11th and June 8th, will be hosted and moderated by Dr. William Farfan Rios, who is a biodiversity postdoctoral fellow at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I see some questions here. So Marielle asks, are there any known differences in medicinal value between wild collected and cultivated plants?
The answer to that is it depends. The plant where that question has been most intensively researched is American ginseng, also Asian ginseng, but there's very little Asian ginseng remaining in the wild in East Asia. And you'll get different answers from different people. It does seem that wild ginseng does have a significantly higher concentration of the medicinal compounds that are active in the human body. And the logic behind it is, if something's in a farmed setting, you give it all the fertilizer it needs, you give it all the soil it needs, got kind of a cushy life. So it doesn't need to produce these compounds that are really evolved to protect the plant. Whereas in the wild, you're going to get a much higher concentration of these. How much the concentration of these bioactive compounds differs is still up for debate. Some studies will say it's, many times. Some studies will say it's really not that different. And some studies will say you're going to get a different particular, variations of these chemicals in a wild setting versus a cultivated setting. So I suppose that's a long-winded way of saying that, yes, there are differences, but research has not concluded on what precisely those differences are.
Pauletta asks, are big pharmaceutical companies interested in this?
Yes. So historically, a lot of these herbs were used for pharmaceuticals. Today, a lot of these herbs are used more for like natural products. Of course, large pharmaceutical companies would have some interest in, but a lot of the people who I talked to were selling these herbs that would either get exported to East Asia to be used in traditional Chinese medicine, or a lot of them would be exported to Europe, where there is a much more often robust natural medicine system that is more integrated into national healthcare systems, as opposed to here, where it tends to be very marginalized. There's no official governing body that offers certifications for clinical herbalists in the United States, whereas there is in many European countries. So yeah, I didn't like, I never encountered like representatives of like, Pfizer, for instance, in, my work in the field doing this.
Great, thank you. We've got a great question from Jasmine. Can you speak to the role that Native American medicinal systems played in the creation of Appalachian folk medical systems?
Yeah, absolutely. Native American Native American medicinal systems absolutely played a role in the creation of Appalachian folk medicine, partly just educating a lot of these newcomers about the uses of some of these plants. A lot of families I spoke to have stories that seem kind of heartwarming about, oh, well, my great, however many great grandparents moved here and, they met like the local Cherokee and the Cherokee taught them about the medicinal plants. I imagine that in reality, the stories were probably a little less heartwarming than that. But it's still true that there was a lot of interest historically in what the native peoples throughout Eastern North America were using these medicinal plants for. And that ultimately got adopted into various local folk medicine systems.
That's great. Thank you. Mary just wants to let you know, thanks so much. Very interesting talk. And we also have another follow-up question from Paulette. How were you received when you started asking questions about this trade?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And that was something that was a bit of a concern before I went into the field, as a young woman who is, has a, quote unquote, like liberal, overeducated, elite Northeast. I mean, I'm from New York, all of these sorts of things. How are people in a male-dominated industry in a deeply conservative part of the country going to receive me? Honestly, it ended up being much less of a barrier than I expected. I think people were very happy to talk about, to talk about their like just genuine love of plants with somebody else who is interested to hear them talk. Heard a lot of complaints about, oh, well, my wife won't let me talk, blather on about this. And they seem happy that I was perfectly happy to let them blather about it. But yeah, no, I mean, it was just like, I think it was just sort of like expressing genuine interest seemed to go over quite well. And then I think also the being a woman thing made people feel like, I don't know, less threatened. Because it typically is a male dominated activity, there was less of a sense that I was going to go and like steal their hidden ginseng spot or a hidden morel spot. So people seemed very willing to share an incredible amount of information with me. So that's just my take on it. I have no idea how accurate that would be from somebody else's perspective.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. We've got another follow-up question from Jasmine. Is there still a preference for wild ginseng amongst Appalachian folk practitioners?
Yeah, I mean, so wild ginseng is on the global marketplace orders of magnitude more expensive than farmed ginseng. Most farmed ginseng is actually grown on large scale industrial farms in Wisconsin and in Canada. And you might sell that for like $30 a pound. Whereas wild ginseng, like if I was like going to walk out into the woods in North Carolina and dig up a ginseng plant or a few ginseng plants, that can sell for upwards of, $800 a pound, even $1,000 a pound for high quality stuff. So there's this huge difference in the global marketplace. So the affordability of it can be a challenge because, there's an opportunity cost to consuming yourself what could otherwise be sold for thousands of dollars. But people will often use the broken root stuff that would be lower quality to sell, but that would be considered to still have the same amount of medicine. But there is this idea that stuff that's wild is stronger. It's this idea that, this plant grew up in the wild. it had to struggle to survive this wild setting. And so maybe by consuming it, we can imbibe some of that strength ourselves. And one herbalist I spoke with actually was talking about this idea of wild plants have roots that can reach down into the clay of the earth. That was the specific phrase that she used, the clay of the earth. And that can draw up power from the earth and, incorporate that into the plant. And then by consuming that, that can help heal your illness. She suggested that this was taken from some kind of biblical reference, but I'm not familiar enough to know what that would have come from.
That's great. We have had a few other questions come in, but we're nearing time. So I'm going to have to send you the questions to answer later, Kate. But I do have one that I'd like for you to close out our time today with you, if that's all right. Would you have any recommendations about places that we could go around here? We're speaking from St. Louis, of course, but of course you could find it elsewhere to see and not harvest some of these plants.
Yeah, well, actually, a lot of these plants do grow down in the Ozarks. So there are a lot of similarities, both culturally as well as environmentally, between the area that I worked in Southern Appalachia and the Ozarks in Missouri and Arkansas. So it would be possible for you to go and walk through the woods and find many of these plants growing there.
That's fabulous. Thank you everyone for joining us. Kate, thank you for totally fascinating presentation. I, in fact, didn't get to ask you my question, so we'll be emailing you. Thank you everyone for your patience, for delays on those questions, but we'll get them to you as soon as we get the recording up. And thank you, Kate, for everything. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Great, thank you so much. And always happy to answer more questions by email.